Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
I wanted to kind of talk through a little bit what this meeting's going to look like today so that everybody's got a sense for how this meeting's going to go before we jump in. Just a reminder, we started about 6 months ago with the goal of looking at what this campus would look like at about 2040. The MSA population estimate for 2040 is about 475,000 people. That looks different than what we are as a community right now, so it's important that we have that lens on throughout today's discussion, and we're talking about what the community wants to be when we move forward. We've heard a lot of numbers, a lot of testimony from user groups. We've seen a lot of great survey data. All are going to play a role in our conversations today. So as we're talking our way through, try to remember those conversations, remind each other of those conversations. And today's meeting is going to go a little like this. We're going to have each committee go through and outline what they've learned, the variables and the decisions from their part of the campus, then the variables and the decisions we need to make on those parts of the campus. Today should be about asking a lot of questions, some debate on certain topics, and starting to draw conclusions as we get to the end of the meeting. After each committee has spoken, we'll have another opportunity for the public to weigh in or ask questions for clarification from what they heard during the first part of the conversation. And after that, we're going to circle back, go through the committees again, and start making some decisions for that final report. We have L&S with us again today. They're going to help us draft that final report. And so today's going to be a lot about giving them direction, the narrative, and both the recommendations from the task force, so that when we circle back together on the 21st, we can look at that draft report and potentially adopt it. Any questions? Make sense to everybody? Ryan, anything you'd like to add?
I think the only thing I'd add is just say thanks again to everybody for your commitment of your time to be a part of this group and to really dive in as we're looking through this lens of 2040 on what recommendations we're going to make. And I think today is really just a level set of what have we learned, and what are the different factors, facts that exist as we're trying to make a recommendation. And so look forward to this discussion, and I think it's going to be good. So thanks again everybody for all your efforts. I know it's been a lot of time, effort, and energy, and certainly appreciate it.
Another big thank you to Mike and his team for hosting us today and the hospitality with the food and drink. You don't have to be sitting at this table to partake. Looks like there is plenty. So again, thank you for that, Mike. Anything else from anybody else before we get started?
No speakable comment.
Like all our other meetings, we're going to start with some public input. If there's anybody here that would like to address the committee, not to exceed 5 minutes, then please feel free to do so at this time. Any questions or comments? If not, let's jump into it. Eric.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Ryan. So as the lead of the public input, I just want to kind of set where we've been, what we've gone through, and kind of where we're at right now. We set out to really try to get as much public input on what we're looking to give as recommendations to the city moving forward. We had a good plan in place in terms of trying to get as much input as we possibly could, and I appreciate all the committees for their really solid questions that enable us to get good feedback from the survey responses online. So I'm just going to quickly go through kind of where we've been, what we've seen from the LNS team in terms of what they gathered from the online survey, and then talk a little bit about the community listening sessions. 5-10 minutes tops. If that's okay, Dan.
You bet.
So we did an online survey June 5th to the 10th for residents 18 plus in the Sioux Falls and surrounding area. The survey was shared by the city by email and social media. The goal was to get a total of 400 respondents. We surpassed that significantly by 3 times as much, getting 1,271 total completes. When the last time that the LNS team presented to us, they had time to review 640 of those responses, and now to this point, they've reviewed all of the 1,271 responses, and they're currently analyzing them fully to have them ready for us for the final recommendations on August 20. So just some of those high-level results. Good news on the events campus as a whole. 99% of the respondents had attended an event at the event center campus, so obviously people that know the campus well. 38% of those respondents have attended 10 or plus events in the last 2 years, with 79% of those respondents attending at least 4 events in the last 2 years. So obviously well-informed citizens taking that survey. 85% of the respondents rate the quality of events at the event center campus as good or excellent. 76% of those respondents rate the variety of events also as good or excellent. Baseball stadium, 59% of respondents attended an event within the last 2 years. 69% of respondents believe the stadium could be modernized or benefit from significant upgrade. If the city was to invest in the baseball stadium, 37% believe the current stadium should be demolished and built elsewhere, while 32% believe the current stadium should be renovated. Only 45% believe that it's somewhat or very important for the city to invest in a baseball stadium. When it comes to the arena, 74% of respondents attended an event at the arena in the last 2 years. 53% of respondents rate the experience as good or excellent. 64% of respondents believe the stadium could be modernized or benefit from a significant upgrade. 38% of respondents believe the event center should be repurposed as an extension of the event center. 28% of respondents believe the event center should be demolished and replaced with more convention space. And then 57% of respondents are neutral or believe the arena is not important to Sioux Falls. When it comes to the convention center, 53% of respondents believe the current convention center should be expanded. 21% are neutral, meaning only 60% are against expansion of the convention center. 38% think the arena should be renovated for convention space. 28% believe the arena should be demolished and replaced with convention space. And then we have some more discussion about parking. 42% of respondents rate the parking at the event center as good or excellent. 45% of respondents rate the access transportation options at the event center campus as good or excellent. And then 17% of respondents rate the availability of transportation to and from downtown as the event center campus as good or excellent. 70% of respondents are open to using fast transport option to and from the event center campus and downtown. And then finally, 59% of respondents describe the amount of available parking on the campus as poor or fair. So those are just kind of the high-level results that we've received from the online survey. In addition to the online survey, we also did community listening sessions. We did 4 of those, all at different times throughout the city. Those were not well attended, so we did not get a lot of good data from those sessions. So unfortunate there, but we did get a lot of really good data from the online survey. So again, thank you all for your part in providing questions and pushing it out, but that's kind of where we sit for public input. Sure. Any questions before we move on to Tony?
Eric, how were those community listening sessions advertised?
So we sent out a press release from the city on Thursday, July. Sorry, I'm going to get my dates wrong.
But there was a...
Yeah, there was a press release went out. All the media was alerted to it. The city did social media around it, provided to their sources.
And when you say not well attended, you mean like a handful?
Very,
really?
yes,
Very few?
Very few. I mean, we were set up to handle hundreds of people, and we had handfuls.
Wow.
So.
And Terry, I
That's
think
too bad.
Kelvin did pick it up the evening before the first listening session. We did have some pretty interesting weather for the morning of the first listening session. We had an hour-long downpour, so it wasn't really...
But there were 3 others
Right.
down,
Yep.
so that's too
And
bad.
all at different times throughout the city, too. So it should not have been a barrier for anybody to
Good.
suggest that they would not be able to attend.
Good.
Eric, you mentioned that LNS is in the process of looking at all the results instead of the sample size we looked at from our last. Any early indication that looking at all the results is going to change statistically the results we listen to?
I appreciate the follow-up because I forgot to add that into my statement. No, from all indications from the other survey results that were not in that initial 640, it's all same baseline. They don't anticipate any change in terms of percentages by more than a couple percentages.
Sure.
Thank you for that follow-up. Other questions?
That was my same question, thank you. Well, if you double the end value of your survey responses, if it changed the outcome from your earlier data, I was just curious if that was the case.
Yep, that's our understanding from LNS.
I guess, Eric, I would just commend you being the leader of the public input group and then this group entirely as a whole. I think from the very beginning, this group has very much so sought public input, and we've done a good job of doing that. And I very much so am also disappointed in the lack of numbers that we got from the forum, but I think we did a good job in pushing that out between a press release, being on KELOLAND News, and then social media as well. I think we certainly did the best we could in seeking out that public input. And as far as our other meetings, we've been open to public input at the beginning of every meeting, and we also had a survey we got great results out of that, 2,000 plus people. So maybe people aren't as interested as they used to be in coming out and speaking. They just want to be online and give their answers that way. But I think the group overall has done a good job of seeking public input.
That's all I have unless there are other questions.
Any other questions?
I do. When you put it out to social media, what were the ramifications and guidelines of the people that saw it?
For the online survey or for the community listening session?
Both.
For both. I don't think there were any parameters.
No parameters. It wasn't, I don't think there were any sort of sponsored posts where you get to choose those parameters. It was just a blanket posted.
So it's just on a page that people would
The
need to follow?
city Facebook page, the city website, all their social media channels, and I know that some other entities shared their posts to other organizations. So it was a wide reach. It's just a matter of, there was no paid, so it wasn't to a target population.
Okay. So to clarify, it was on the city's social media, and then their users shared that post then?
Correct.
Do you know how many shares there were?
I don't have that information. I'd have to talk to the city communications director, I guess, to find that.
We can find that out.
Any other questions for Eric? If not, thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. Mr. Dorr.
All right, thank you, Dan. I also want to thank the Arena and Convention Center Subcommittee. We know a big part of our work really hinges on the future of the arena and then our needs around convention center space. So important work, and it was a large subcommittee, so thank you. I think we can all be proud of the work that we've accomplished so far. I'm really going to focus on process and then what we learned. In terms of process, I really go back 6 months. A lot of this work was done as an entire events campus study group. We started in February, really defining the scope of work, the 2040 vision, wanting to look at this from yes, there are needs immediately, near term, intermediate term, but also not losing sight that we're charged with what this is going to look like in 20 years. We put information from a convention, sports, and leisure, relatively recent report from April of 2018 that the entire group was able to study. We received the existing site and facility tours. In March, we completed a financial report provided by the city, a review of the campus financials, capital needs, contracts. We also looked at capital expenditures, both past, current projects that are underway right now, and then also future investments. Took a look at the next 5 years. In April, we got to hear from stakeholders. A number of those are with us here today, and I appreciate your involvement on this journey. We got to hear from the Sioux Falls School District, the Canaries, Dual, Sioux Falls Sports Authority, SMG, Sioux Falls Convention and Visitors Bureau, and really got some good information in April when the entire committee met. In May, is really when the subcommittee work began. So the last 3 months we've been highly involved in looking at what did we learn the first 3 months, what else do we need to know, and then take it from there. But in terms of research, our first subcommittee meeting, we really wanted to talk about our deliverables, the audience that we were going to provide this report to, the alternatives, defined data sets, and our stakeholders we still needed to consult. We took a look at past Event Center Task Force reports. We looked at specifically the 2019 final report. We also had an opportunity, since it had been 3 months since we had gone through this, the entire subcommittee went back through the CSL report with a little different perspective after hearing from the various stakeholders. We got a chance to look at historical operational performance. We got a better understanding of local and regional market demand. While we were Arena and Convention Center, we also talked, evaluated different parking considerations. We know that's an important part of this process. Eric was our liaison with the public feedback, our public input subcommittee, and we worked with that group in LNS to develop questions for the survey. We spent time just assessing the current state of the campus, where we're at now, doing a financial review of both the Arena and Convention Center, digging deeper there. And then also a conversation around neighboring properties and related opportunities, whether it be Earl McCart Fields, Central Services Building, anything that is adjacent. I just wanted to have conversations, make sure we're uncovering any potential opportunities. We looked at what our current capacities are in terms of flat floor space, and heard again and again the importance of that for bringing conventions and activities to our community. We got additional information from the city around our 2020-2025 capital improvement plan. Dan referenced it earlier. We got population estimates from the city of Sioux Falls to understand where we're at today and where our community is projected to be in 15-20 years. We also took a look at what other communities have done with dated arenas or older facilities. Long Beach, Tulsa are a few examples there. We spent some additional time with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, really understanding the economics and facts around what we're hosting today, what opportunities are there, and what challenges are there in terms of scheduling. We also looked at opportunities that maybe we haven't been able to capitalize on or don't even pursue as a community because we might not meet the minimum threshold or criteria for some of those bigger conventions. We talked economic impact, and I should just pause there. Really, when our subcommittee met and talked, while it's easy to get focused on the numbers, and we really wanted to step back and say, all right, what's best for the city of Sioux Falls? Putting biases aside, what is going to be the greatest economic impact for the city of Sioux Falls, and from a quality of life perspective? And I was really proud of the group in challenging and asking those questions. we learned through our work with the CVB around Destination International in terms of industry standards for calculating return on investment when we can get somebody here in our community in the dollars they spend, both indirectly and or directly and indirectly, what that means for our city. We spent some time as well on connectivity considerations, both on campus. There's conversations around downtown and getting back and forth. So conversations were had there. We really looked at, and I'll just get into the alternatives that we considered and went down each one of these paths to understand what was possible, what was feasible. And I'll start with the arena. And here's really the alternatives we looked at. We could do nothing and not spend any additional future dollars or capital expenditures. We could go status quo with ongoing annual capital improvements and investments. We could take the arena out of service, essentially go dark with the facility, no longer heat and cool it. We could demolish the arena and do nothing until an unspecified future date. There's opportunity there, if the arena wasn't there, for convention center space. We talked private-public partnership, and then we spent a lot of time on, with the existing facility, what does that look like from a re-engineering standpoint, and what is possible with the shell. And I'll get into more of that later, but we really talked a lot about re-engineering or repurposing, and we studied a few examples in that, and then Jared and Andrea were real critical in that piece in terms of looking at the structure itself and understanding what would we have in terms of finished product, and would we be happy with that when we were finished. In terms of the convention center, we admitted we could do nothing. Another option we discussed was potential expansion to the east. We talked about, also part of this conversation was if you re-engineer or repurpose the arena, what kind of additional space we could glean from that. And then similar to the arena, arena conversation, if the arena was no longer there, what additional square footage we could get in that direction. So that's really our process. If there's any other committee members that want to interject before I go into what we learned from that process. All right, I'll keep moving. While we want to focus on the long term, we realized early on in our journey that a near-term decision on the arena was probably the most pressing decision for our community and for our subcommittee. The average or annual operating loss over $500,000 per year for the arena. We've had $2.7 million invested in maintenance improvements in the past 5 years with the arena, and in the current CIP is our understanding that just shy of $3 million is built into that plan from 2020 to 2025. So spent a lot of time and discussion around the arena, but those are some of the big takeaways. Realizing that, hey, as a community, do we want to continue to invest in an arena knowing this, or do we want to look at other alternatives? Regarding the convention center, and a lot of the convention center will hinge on what that decision is with the arena. But following that decision on the arena, we believe a near-term, intermediate-term decision needs to happen regarding the addition of more convention center space. Within our research, we found Sioux Falls to be behind when compared to a number of our peers that we go head-to-head against for conventions here throughout the Midwest. And I'll just, and we did also look at the existing facility, and Scott's here, and feel free to jump in. we believe that this space continues to serve us well, although we do realize it's over 20 years old now. And we know there's been improvements made here. But as a community, when you talk population projections, and we compared it to other communities of either like size or ones that we go head to head with, we found that we're behind. Sioux Falls currently, and I'm not including the arena or Premier Center, currently just over 60,000 square foot of convention center space. And I'll compare, and I'll just give you a couple others. And this is the handout that I handed out last meeting. Rochester, Minnesota is at 200,000 square feet. Omaha, 288,000 square feet. Des Moines at 286. Wichita, Kansas, just over 187,000 square feet. So we felt, and we'll talk about in the recommendations, that additional space was a need. Is something just to keep pace, but I think Sioux Falls citizens would agree. We don't like being on the bottom of any list, and we usually like to do more than just keep pace. So we took a hard look at that, and we'll get to a recommendation on that. We also did, and part of this in terms of connectivity, it's tough to talk about convention center space without talking about hotel rooms and hotel rooms that are connected, and the importance of that when it comes to connectivity and attracting major conventions. So we did have a significant conversation around that need, and we'll talk about what we're recommending on hotel rooms when we get to that point.
Tony, can you remind me, who are the remaining user groups in the arena today?
Circus.
Yeah, Shriners, Shrine Circus. Then most of it's just extension for flat floor space for the most part.
Right.
A lot of annual trade shows.
Yeah.
Correct.
Augustana's moving to the Pentagon basketball.
Yeah, there's some basketball with this High School State Association. I think Augie's got is there a national wrestling tournament coming up in a couple of years?
We are talking to somebody, and then that may be house over here. But yeah, the high school sports do basketball over there. Shrine Circus, a couple of graduations over there annually.
Ice show once a year,
What's that?
the ice show,
Not over there.
or the fishing.
Fishing. Ice
Fishing.
Oh, yeah.
Over here, once a year.
Fewer and fewer each year.
And that was just like the extension of the convention space, basically.
One other comment I'd like to add. First of all, thanks, Tony, for leading our group and compiling all of this data for us, so we always had a good record of what we discussed. One thing we did talk about in our subcommittee was the possibility of, and we've heard from a number of people that say build up, not out, or at least consider up, not out. So we looked at whether or not the current convention center space could accommodate building on top. And thanks to Jared, we learned that the structure is not in place on that part of the facility to be able to build up. So basically we can take that off of the list of potential possibilities for expansion, and we would not be able to build on top of the current convention center space. One idea was potentially having more meeting rooms, which are being requested by a lot of groups, and that possibly those could be on the second floor, but again, that's not a possibility on the current space.
We did talk about that possibility, depending on where that addition is.
Space, yes.
And that potentially being part of our recommendation.
Like we've been talking about from the very beginning, you can see how there's a variety of dominoes that need to fall over before you can make decisions on everything. So the first half of this meeting is intended to remind us of all those variables, every part of the discussion for each facility, and then the second half of the meeting, we're going to start knocking down those dominoes and trying to formulate a plan. So Great, Tony, thank you very
Yeah,
much.
and I referenced it, but really appreciate from an architectural and a structural standpoint, understanding what's feasible. Because it's one thing to say, yeah, we should just do that. It's another thing to put pen to paper and understand if that's realistic. So it's great to have that throughout with just about every decision that our conversation we had was, what's it going to cost and can we even do that? Sure.
So if I would summarize what you said, Tony, in terms of the arena, we're looking at a facility that, if we're just looking at the facts, we're looking at a facility that's very underutilized from a programmatic standpoint, and we're losing some version. There's an annual operating loss of $500,000 with some significant capital investment needs. And then on the convention center side, we have a facility that's service well, is working, could be better, but really in the realm of competition out there, we're in the bottom tier. And in order to be competitive, it would seem, the data would suggest we probably need some more space. Is that an effective summary button on kind of what was learned through the process?
That's fair.
I think it should be added that we're not only in the bottom tier, we're like second to bottom, which is so not the norm for our community. We are at the very bottom, when you're talking about 60,000 square feet in comparison to what other cities our size or a little bit bigger have.
And also, those cities that we gave that information, those cities are already adding on. So those numbers, in a year from now, when they're finished building, they're going to be significantly higher. Also note, Sioux City, if you've been watching the news, Sioux City all of a sudden now is going to start building and adding facilities. They're creating a CVB. They're really getting ready to rev up. As some people have said, oh, don't worry, they don't have anything else to sell. But you know, you never know. There's still competition, and they're still, close by. So we'll see.
Can you remind us, Terry, where does Rapid City fall in terms of space on a comparable basis?
Well, they're a bit, we don't really compete against them for conventions much.
Similar size.
Yeah, and they're going to build their new event center now. They haven't paid a lot of attention to conventions over the past few years. I know that their CVB has been told by their leadership that they need to up their convention business. They need to focus more on that. They get more like, they'll get some state business, not a lot because their hotel room rates are higher because of seasonal business. We don't compete with them too much at all. We're more Omaha, Milwaukee, Kansas City, and whoever else might pop up.
One thing I'll note too is,
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, they think tourism as a leisure traveler, and we think of tourism, leisure travel as one of our markets, not the market.
yeah, we'll note through our journey, arena built in 1961, the city in conjunction with SMG, CVB, it really worked well to maximize what we have to this point. And now 5 years in to the Denny Sanford Premier Center, it's fun to have that asset. And that's what our group really looked at. All right, now we know we have this. Where will we go from here?
Any other questions or comments for Tony?
Not necessarily a question, but maybe more of a comment. You had mentioned sealing off and not utilizing it at all. About what percent of the survey respondents agreed with just sealing it off and not doing anything with it? So they want to do something with that space. So I appreciate your recommendations. I think the public would agree with something. And, you know, I think I mentioned them earlier, about 2/3 of the survey respondents agreed with Terry in terms of adding more convention center space, so.
They saw a high value.
Yes.
I think one of the things that's important to note is one, that the part of use that is working in the area right now is as an addition to flat floor space. Even with that, the economics of the facility right now are bad. The facility has served a great life for us, but a lot of the things that took place there now are preferring to be here, and the economics are stronger for them in this facility than it was in that facility, because as we hear over and over again, the customer experience is everything. The amenities that are available in this building just don't exist over there.
And I'd probably say that without knowing all the history from back to 1960, it was essentially built for sports. And that's probably what the main goal of the building was and should be. And quite frankly, there's no longer a consistent sports tenant there. So I think, and that shows in the operating loss on an annual year is over $500,000. It really shows.
And I think from that economic perspective, the splash you get with a big concert is great. Everybody knows they're in town whether you're going to it or not. But this facility is packed with convention centers day in and day out. On a Thursday like today, there's a bunch of people over there bringing economic impact to the community, even though most of the community doesn't know what's going on in that facility today.
We also looked at, it's referenced in the study, the number of other venues that have been built in our community since the arena was, that handle smaller concerts and various events. I've been fortunate to have addition to the Pentagon, the district, a number of other facilities. So
it's great.
And also, we need to remember too, and I know you all do, but just as we're presenting all this, the direct economic impact is one thing, but the indirect, how many jobs, sales tax, you know, the rollover effect, the indirect is so important and really much more something that people relate to than the direct. You know, if you throw out, you know, $450 million in direct spending, oh yeah, okay, well, but if you start talking, you know, 4,800 jobs or whatever, and the rollover effect of 3 to 5 times, and start touching people in the community, that's really what matters when we're talking about the value of these buildings and what they do for our community. So I think as we move forward, we want to get that language in there and relate to the public of what it does for them.
Yeah, just the entertainment venues owned by the city is 875 jobs. Plus
Just by the city?
Just the city,
Yeah.
that's Pavilion out here, or, I mean, so, yeah, in the hotels, the zoo,
Yeah.
everything else that's goes up and up.
Anything else for Tony? If not, Mr. Herbert.
Thank you all. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about Sioux Falls Stadium. I want to thank everybody as well for all their great participation and for the baseball subcommittee as well. Pretty exciting to be thinking about the community on the future of Sioux Falls Stadium. But one of the interesting things, and I'm going to follow I was intending to follow a similar format as Tony, but a whole lot of the process was similar with this specific sort of caveat towards Sioux Falls Stadium. So I'll mention a few of those things and add a few more points, but I won't basically reiterate a lot of the same processes we went through. The interesting thing to start out with, though, is that Sioux Falls Stadium and what happens hinges a great deal on the other activities. That's one of the charges we've had, and that makes this kind of a unique challenge because we, to some degree, have to suppose what happens if the convention center were to increase. Is it double? What is that amount? And what does that do for the amount of people on this campus? What does that do for the amount of parking required?
Does that require additional hotel space? And then what does that do for the number of parking spaces? And what does that do for the traffic here? And so the same for the arena, what happens there. So it's a little bit of again, a domino type of scenario, and we need to continue to talk about that and think about that as a part of this recommendation, because we did not necessarily look at this specifically as a standalone sort of situation. With that, looking at that, a lot of the same ideas that, or the processes that Tony mentioned, but of course, thinking about Sioux Falls Stadium and gaining insight into the city's operations, expenditures, and paying special attention about learning about that, paying attention to the surveys, and the survey was somewhat torn between renovation and build new or build somewhere else. Understanding more about contracts and leases related to that from the city's perspective. So really, the question being, what should the city's future be regarding Sioux Falls Stadium when we look out 20 years? I'll add a few more facts and notes here. The city currently, or last year, subsidized or participated for about $240,000 as a part of their agreement with maintaining at the stadium. They likely will need about $3 million more in the very near future for some facility upgrades, like health, safety, and maintenance, things that they are obligated for, we are obligated for. We wanted to explore the city's costs, its needs, its profitability, its expectations, its role in the Sioux Falls Stadium, what the economic impact inside and outside of game day experiences might be. And as I mentioned, understanding the structure of the agreement with the Canaries, conditions of the facility, opportunities and challenges, and how to make this the most profitable and successful to the taxpayers who Falls, and understand connectivity. That's a big thing here, as well as I mentioned parking. And we did have a few kind of overriding themes that we talked about in terms of kind of this vision for the future of the community with professional baseball. We did come to a pretty good understanding, a solid, unanimous understanding that we believe that professional baseball does belong in Sioux Falls. And we want to see, we believe that the city should continue in that effort. But it needs, we think it needs to be an equitable public-private partnership. And we need to figure out what that is and what that means. And that's for a little bit of a discussion here. And all of this also revolves around the quality of life issues, events, experiences, some of those intangible aspects of some of these social offerings of a community. But we really do believe that we would like this to be the gold standard among our peers and in our community as a stadium. And we wanted to attract top talent, both for the ball club, but for visitors, and help with the best possible return on investment. On top of that, we'd like to further explore stimulating the economy beyond that. What can that be and what can that do? So that was the second kind of pillar. And then the sustainability, operational sustainability. What can that look like? What should that be? Can that be net neutral or positive for the city? Is that realistic? Is that not realistic? Some conversations around that. And then land use, again, is a very, very big one, because this conversation would be very different if this were in some other standalone location. And so that was a big piece of that. So parking and access, all pieces and parts of that. So that's in a nutshell. I could talk a little bit more about those processes, but really you covered a vast majority of them, Tony. Does anybody have any questions on the stadium as we go into further discussion?
I know we've talked about it, Tom, but can you just remind me when was the stadium originally built?
I have that in here. It's about 64. 64? Yeah, the arena. Yeah. Yeah, I think 64 is right. 64, yeah. And there were a couple of major renovations done over to it about 25 years ago. 20 years ago. Well, 25 years ago.
Thank you, Tom. Any other questions or comments for Tom?
That $3 million for, what does that include?
Yeah, TJ, can you help
I'm going to
look
kick
at
it
some
to
of these
Scott.
details?
What's that?
The 3 million capital in the coming years.
Well, a lot of the capital that we're talking about over there is really not fan-enhancing experiences at all. It's really just taking care of the facility. Some renovations to the locker rooms is a big one. But other than that, it's tuck pointing, concrete work, waterproofing, obviously foul poles, or not foul poles, but foul ball netting and all that sort of stuff is going to go into. That's really the major renovations. It's not lighting, sound, or video boards or any of that stuff, but it's mainly just some small renovations that are going to happen throughout the facility. Nothing major. It's over the course of many years that we'll see those. So I think in the last 2 years we've stuck $600,000 or so into the facility, and that's just taking care of what needs to be fixed.
Sidewalk repairs.
Sidewalk repairs, ADA items, a lot of work like that.
Tom, you mentioned $240,000 number. That's an annual number?
That's what we paid last year. Before that, as I understand, a little bit more difficult the way that they set up SD, but we think that, I guess, we don't really know exactly how that was broken down, the way that the city was structured, but that's probably, it's a, beyond last year, it's kind of a yes. That was probably, I don't think that they did anything substantially different from last year, from previous years. It's just a matter of last year being able to record that expense a little bit more accurately. Is that fair?
Right. It was part of the park and rec budget for a long time, so it was mixed in with their kind of R&M capital items. So it wasn't really broken down separately. And then when it moved to the entertainment tax fund, it was far easier to realize the costs.
So that's a one-year number, but within reason, that's an expectation.
Yeah,
on an ongoing basis.
It's probably about the same.
Yeah, it'll be close. Yeah, it all depends on attendance and beverage, and again, the amount of labor and overhead that has to go over there to operate the facilities.
Remind me, but our major user groups right now is obviously the Canaries, but is there we have some college baseball that takes place there, and then some other one-off concert events. Is that the full universe of what's happening over there?
Yeah, we're obviously the sole tenant, or not the sole tenant, but the major tenant. University of Sioux Falls plays there as well as their home ballpark, so all their spring games or practices as well as fall practices. And then some one-off events such as high school tournaments, college tournaments. We have a big Legion tournament coming up, a big regional tournament this next week. So events such as that are the main sources of use.
And remind me again, from a contractual standpoint, that facility now falls under SMG, is that correct?
SMG is the contract administrator for the city.
And Tom, you mentioned it, and we looked at some of the numbers in terms of SEBA and youth baseball. A lot of our conversations, we talked about Sioux Falls baseball community. I thought that was interesting that TJ, I know you shared some of that, but one of our fastest growing youth sports is baseball.
Yeah, if you were to ask me between like basketball, tennis, baseball, pickleball, what else is there? Soccer, thank you. Between like those are like the 5 big, and softball. Between those, the one that we have the most demand for more of right now would be baseball.
I would say, in my opinion, after studying the facility over there, it's not a use problem. I think for the for the days that we have good weather up here in Sioux Falls. I think the facility is probably used fairly frequently between USF, Legion Baseball, and the Canaries. To me, when I've looked at it, it seems to be a little bit more of a depth problem. What I mean by that is how far are we stretching into the regular general public as far as how much use are they getting out of this facility? How often is the regular Joe in Sioux Falls going out to a game out of there, whether it's Canaries or otherwise? And I think that's where I struggle a little bit is what type of economic benefit or social benefit are we getting back from it? I don't think there's as much depth there with that facility as you can maybe see.
Any other comments or questions on baseball? If not, I'll move into the last category of parking, connectivity, etc. It's a little bit different from the other committees in that we haven't had side meetings on different things or different topics, but I've been jotting a lot of notes about things that we need to not forget as we've gone through this process and as we've sat through all the other committee meetings that we can talk about now. The first big one, of course, is parking. And that very much is one of those topics that some of these other dominoes need to fall into place before we can decide how we're going to address parking. I think it's interesting that from the survey results, for the most part, people are semi-okay with what the parking status is now. Now, as the campus changes, so too will the needs of parking at this location. And so while the survey results say it's kind of okay, it's still one of those things people talk about. I think it's somewhat related to, again, the weather we have in South Dakota when it's 20 below wind chill and you are at that very end of the parking lot. Parking seems worse that night than it does when you're walking to baseball on a 65-degree night. So perspective is important. And we can circle back to parking later again after we've tried to knock down some of those dominoes and figure out what that looks like next. We touched on a little bit about adjacent properties, and rather than get into specific properties around the campus, I think it's fair to say we see this campus growing and changing over the next 20 years. I think it would be wise for us later to consider a recommendation about the city taking a look at adjacent properties as they become available to help enhance the success of the campus. I think walkability and the pedestrian-friendly nature of the campus is not going to go away. In 20 years, we don't know exactly how things are going to look, but I think the adjacent properties, the other commercial areas, them having easy walkable access to this campus is going to become increasingly important, and we should plan for that. Terry and I did participate in a conversation with the city on rapid transit options. This is not a new topic for the city. They're already engaged in this conversation. I did heavily, and I think Terry did quite a bit too, that maybe the first two energy centers within the city that should be connected for rapid transit would be this campus and downtown. That's what makes sense to me. We can talk about that more later in the meeting, but all the user groups we've had testimony from over the last 6 months, the energy of downtown only helps the success of all of those. And through the survey results, you can see people want options before and after a concert. And while there are some here, and they do get utilized during those peak events, there are not enough of them here to accommodate the size of events that are taking place on this campus. So connectivity to downtown, I think, makes sense. And that rapid transit between the two should continue to be explored. Again, we've talked about it a little bit before, but the development in town of the ride-sharing services between Lyft and Uber kind of falls in line with our parking concept. I think those services are getting used more and more, especially for the evening entertainment options that take place in this particular facility. those things weren't as popular 5 years ago when we built the Premier Center, and so we need to account for those. And as design and capital improvements happen on this campus, we need to make sure we're remembering that and planning for those as we grow. One of the other things on my list was to not forget that if and when we do a capital project on this campus, the folks at SMG and the convention center need a lot more storage on site than they currently have. Is that still a fair statement?
That is always a fair statement.
And if and when we get to the point where we're talking about changes to the facility, those storage needs and on-site needs are only going to increase. Make note of that as one of the things we should not forget in our area of miscellaneous topics on campus.
I think also with that, the SMG staff is scattered throughout the facility. With their office space, there's no just one area where they can all...
So one general office.
Yeah, no one general office where they can work together and collaborate without walking across the entirety of the campus in a lot of cases. Was it the IT guys or in the sports box in the...
They are.
Yeah.
They are.
Just because it's an available space, so...
It used to be quite a bit worse. It has gotten a little better, but it's still scattered about.
Yeah.
But at least we got people out of closets.
Yeah. I like to have here servers, so.
That was kind of the end of my list, but open to the fact that there might be more. Does anybody have anything else for kind of that catch-all category for the task force?
Yeah, I'll just add one of the items that came up in our conversation was as the campus grows and evolves, the potential for green space or entrances to the, for us that live here, we know where we're going, we get there easily, but if you're from another community and pull up outside, where do you go in? And is there an opportunity to have more of a primary entrance or entrances?
Yep.
So consideration around that and how we architect that moving forward.
I think it's a great point because we all see it from, we've been to this facility a variety of times. We know what's where, but if you're coming to a convention and you're new to town, because this campus, or particularly this building, has been built in different phases, there's a variety of entrances, and it gets a little confusing. And thank you for bringing it up because I'm just a fan of green space in general. So.
Another item we heard often and from various stakeholders was the need for restaurants and things to do here. I'd say our committee looked at that and then also looked at it through the lens, and feel free to chime in from what tools does the city have to attract restaurants here. If that hasn't happened at this point, what are those opportunities moving forward, and is that city's responsibility or scope, or is that something that happens? So it's a challenging situation. We'd all love to have multiple restaurants and walkability in this area. The fact is that that's not the case today, and the city's role in that moving forward is just a challenge. There's some incentives, but really it's got to make sense for the restaurant owner or business.
Anything else? Sorry.
You say you were going to touch on hotels more. With the expansion of the convention center, is there an idea of how many rooms you would need for, said expansions?
Yeah, we'll touch on that. Do we want to jump into recommendations here? Because that will be part of our recommendation.
I think a lot of that is based on the testimony we've heard both from the convention center, but also the sports authority and what we think attract some other events in the area.
NCAA.
Yep. It's a great segue into, are there any other questions or comments from anybody that they'd like to throw out or ask the community at this point? If not, let's take a quick 5-minute body break and then reconvene and we'll start to go through. I think we'll get started again. We did it kind of quick at the end again, but I just wanted to circle back and make sure that anybody that's not on the task force, if you have any other questions or comments for the committee members before we start to go through and knock down those dominoes, if any other questions pop into your head you'd like to ask, please feel free to do so. Are there any more questions? If not, like I mentioned before, we do have Lawrence and Schiller with us today, and one of our goals by the end of this meeting is to give them enough direction to help us get to a draft report from this committee. We've provided a lot of the narrative already so far, but there should be more coming up, and then starting to look at what those variables look like and which direction the campus should head, what will be in that final report that we recommend to the mayor. With that, I think we should start back with Tony, because the future of the arena and or convention center space is kind of a big first that we need to look at.
Yeah, we talked about that being the first important step, and something that we spent a lot of time on. But yeah, we talked about the arena, built in 1961, and our group was in agreement that it has served the community well over the years, and if you're like me, I have fond memories of either concerts or events that different experiences throughout the years. That said, our subcommittee does not believe it's in the best interest of our community to continue subsidizing an almost 60-year-old facility at an operating loss of over $500,000 a year. Furthermore, we do not believe we should invest another approximately $2.8 million in near-term capital improvements currently allocated within the city's CIP. As I mentioned earlier, we spent considerable time evaluating various re-engineering, repurposing alternatives through the process, and we just never got comfortable that that would be the best return on investment for our community. So based on that evaluation and others, that was expensive, and resulted, if we were to re-engineer it, resulted in something less than desired in terms of additional square footage if you were to look at a second floor to the arena. And it didn't provide the best user experience in terms of ceiling heights, curvature of the arena. With that said, we expect our recommendation here in a few weeks to include sunsetting and a demolition of the current arena.
Talk a little bit more about cost of re-engineering compared to potential rebuild.
Yep. Here you want to.
So through the initial concept, and TSP and Journey went through just a conceptual idea of what it would take structurally in order to even create a second floor. We found that it would be close to 300 tons of steel, plus the renovations to the roof structure that we would need in order to get the steel in place. And so we are still finalizing what that would be, but even understanding the cost of just the material, the means and methods to get the re-engineered space into the building, we didn't feel, and the fact that the depth of that structure would be anywhere between 62 inches and 70 inches in order to create the span or clear floor space needed. We didn't believe that in the final report, the numbers will come out, but we didn't believe that that was the best investment. Now, with the numbers, we need to caveat that that doesn't include any architectural finishes needed in order to elevate the space to something that is easy to sell. So that's part of what we are looking at right now, is if we include that in the recommendations or not. Just structurally, just to make it the floor space needed, it was more investment than our subcommittee was willing to recommend.
The CSL report referenced the re-engineering option, and I know that there's a couple other SMG facilities that show that as a potential option. Can you talk to us about, assuming that cost wasn't a factor, what would that even look like? And is that something that is, in terms of satisfying the convention center, they just at least talk about that? What that would kind of look like?
Well, the uniqueness of the structure itself. So it's not a more traditional work with. So you have to work inside of that. So and then you go break that shell, if you will. It's a major. So that's a unique piece that probably doesn't relate to. It's not one size fits all. If we compare it to 2 others or 3 other scenarios, so that's probably the part that we looked at first and foremost. Is we're really building a shell within a shell, just keeping really the structure, the outside look. But then at a conceptual stage, we were just looking at what does it take to get that floor space that we're trying to go to. But we also know that we've got to make it look like something. We've got to make it appealing, a feel to it that we didn't expect to address as we were pretty uncomfortable. And our committee, as we talked, at the end, we've got a high price tag for an 80-year-old, 60 plus 20, 80 years down the road, and we still haven't gotten off that list. So.
And to circle back to the additional square footage, which will come out in the recommendations when we move to the next step through Tony's recommendation, through the subcommittee's recommendations that Tony has led. We wouldn't receive the amount of additional square footage that we would aim as a subcommittee to recommend in the near term. Because of the curvature of the roof, that second floor has a smaller footprint in order to create even a comfortable head height with the amount of structure we need to put in that facility. So unless the whole community, the taxpayers, have an appetite of completely building a new structure in its place and blowing out the roof in order for that, now it almost pushes it to a demolish and a rebuild in order to get the desired square footage.
We talked about second floor, the curvature, but we talked even what we'd be looking at in terms of ceiling height on the first floor.
Correct.
Compared to current convention center space.
Yeah, I would have to go back to our notes, but it's significantly lower. If you walked into our current space right now, that's what, 25 feet? We would be looking close to a very typical office building height of actual ceiling to floor because of all of the structure and the HVAC that would need to be put in place. 9 to 12 foot ceilings at most.
We talked about it from a user experience standpoint and an expense standpoint or investment, and that's where we pivoted. Go ahead, Tom.
Initially, was interested when you were exploring the idea of maybe there would be some sort of retractable or drop-down roof, and for relatively low expense, you could repurpose this as some sort of ballroom space or something like that. But what I learned and gained was that it has to be a space that people are going to want to rent, and it's going to take a major overhaul of that space to be a first-rate facility, because we have better facilities here right now, and nobody wants to go over there unless you've got a first-rate facility. So doing that, it's paid for, all you got to do is drop a roof. It doesn't matter, it's not getting rented, it's not generating revenue, there's still a bunch of expenses, operating expenses. So it's became less attractive.
Jared, you touched on it. When we step back and say 20 years from now, do we envision a campus that includes an 80-year-old arena, even if it's just a shell? The consensus was no.
DOT has a great plan.
Well, the point I made in our subcommittee group is, without specifically referencing years, we continued to build new buildings attached to old buildings. It amounts to having floor heights that don't match. It amounts to having elevators that have to open on two sides in order to meet floor requirements. It creates all kinds of ADA issues. It creates firewall separation issues, which increases the cost of your buildings. And then eventually, one of those older structures becomes obsolete or no longer usable, the ability to try to take it down while it's connected to newer buildings drives up cost and makes your operation, whatever you're trying to accomplish in that space, nearly impossible. So it's very hard to recommend, as you said, we're looking forward 20 years, considering having an 80-year-old building left on this campus that I think we're somewhat in agreement has really served us well, but is nearing the time when it should be sunsetted, simply because of the structure and the age and all of the issues that we could list of what's potentially wrong in that building today. There's no elevators. Restroom facilities are not adequate for the building. On and on that list goes. So consequently, I think the point being, I didn't sense anyone came to the committee suggesting on day one, let's just tear it down. Nobody felt that way. But as we've learned and as we've gained more information and looked closer at the building, the recommendation, as you suggested, of sunsetting and demoing it, which leads to another phase, which we'll talk about shortly. But thanks for letting me point that out. But building adjacent to older facilities really creates long-term problems.
Well said. Any other comments on the arena? Or move on to convention center space?
The only thing
So just one thing, maybe Terry or Jim or Mike, so we talked about that it would be a 9 to 12 foot ceiling if we re-engineered it. What's the industry standard, 25, like everywhere?
You gotta be able to think of displays coming in and decorative things for different events and such. You just can't do that. I mean, I just won't. It's not sellable.
I agree, we would not be able to use that space anywhere close to our needs with a low ceiling like that at all.
They'd walk in the room, look at it, and walk out. Say no.
I think you should note too, we did spend time saying, if you just kept the flat floor space and the facility, what could we do in terms of enhancing the existing structure and bringing in the various items that concerts need and that different users need. If you want to just talk to, just the way that the ceiling is now.
Structurally, that wasn't designed for a rigging grid. So when you walk into this facility at the Denny Sanford Premier Center, you have a rigging grid system that is, it was designed from day one as part of the structure, and it actually, for everyone who walks into the facility, that actually isn't the roof structure. The grid that you see when you look up, you'll see the grid and then you'll see some curtain-like things that actually help the sound. Above that is the structure for the building. What we have directly in the arena is structure to the building, and it isn't designed for a rigging grid. That rigging grid is where all of the extra weight goes for all of the lights and the stage operations and the curtains. So we would be in a similar situation as we are for creating a secondary floor, that we would be creating a secondary ceiling. So we'll have significant amount of steel, and then the means and methods of getting it into that building.
And to add to that, even if we could do all of that, we only, the dock area, the loading and unloading, people aren't going to use it because in order to do it, it's a 2-day situation, if I'm understanding correctly. You know, you have to have your people come in the day before, unload whatever set up, and most people want to come in and do it all in one shot. So they're not going to come and use it.
Good point, operational. but I loved the arena. I still love the arena, and it served us extremely well. I really enjoyed watching Summit Leagues in that space, and so just to reiterate what OT said, I was one of those that came in thinking that that would be our recommendation.
I don't disagree. It's hard to see this campus in 2040 with having an 80-year-old building, and agree with the fact that the arena served us well, but it's probably time to look at the best use for the campus and the community on that square footage. I will say that part of our narrative should probably include some verbiage about making sure the city and SMG work with our existing user groups to find a equitable and functional future use for whatever user groups still remain in the arena. A variety of them are flat floor space, but there still are a couple that use them with the existing facility, and let's help them find a good new home.
All right, thank you, Dan. We'll move on to a convention center space where we also spent a significant amount of time, due diligence around looking at needs, wants, desires, long-term, near-term. And we believe as a subcommittee, and will be part of our recommendation, that we have an opportunity to significantly increase our community's capacity in this category. We believe it's a need today and will continue to be a need for our community to stay competitive and attractive when we look at whether it's local, regional, or national events, the opportunity for more rooms, more space. We're in consensus that even just to stay even, and Terry mentioned some of the other investments by communities that continue to move those communities forward. We looked at all that, and we intend to recommend to the city, right behind our arena recommendation, that at a minimum, doubling the size of the existing convention center space as soon as we're able to as a community. And within that, we talked about it as part of the engineering, making sure whether it's on that same space where the arena is now, or another direction, that potentially incorporating some green space or entryway as part of that recommendation. But that's our near-term recommendation. And when you look out, we talked about the need, you mentioned earlier, to continue to grow the campus, because we know that if you're looking out 2040, that need is even greater.
Doubling the space is needed for the future use. Doesn't necessarily make us competitive with the other communities yet. Is that a fair statement, Terry?
It's needed right now.
I think there'll be a lot of people that'll say, well, the cost to tear down the arena is exponential, and it is quite high. The cost to build a facility like that will be quite high, and I think the answer is probably yes, that's right. But I think in order to really be fiscally responsible here as we go forward, you have to look at what we're currently spending, and you look at the $500,000 operating loss out of the arena. It's not fiscally responsible to keep doing what we're doing. So I think this is a community that looks towards the future and wants to do things that are going to last for 20 plus years. And if you look at just trying to renovate the arena, I think that's what we're looking at, a 20-year Band-Aid type thing. And I don't think that's the direction we should go in. I think we need to look towards something greater, and that's going to have a longer lasting impact for the city.
Well said. I think there's a high cost to doing nothing. I think if you look at the event center, the East Hampton Premier Center, people in the community and the people that visit our community and see that, I think the first word is wow, and they're impressed. And I think because of that, we've seen some entertainment content that we haven't seen in forever. And when you look at, through the 2040 lens, where do we want to be? And as a community, it's not in that bottom tier of that list that we talked about before, but it's, somewhere up that pack and to be the best. So I think we have, it's outside of our scope to, know exactly what that looks like, but we know we need to do something. And I think we'll all be pretty proud of standing behind that, to know that we're suggesting to make that kind of investment.
I think my biggest concern with that initially was, is this the right spot to expand? And knowing what we know about what people are looking for in a convention center when they're coming from out of town, it's walkability, it's activity, it's all of the other amenities. Are we maximizing the economic impact at this location with potential of retail sales, property tax revenue, the whole return on investment? But looking at, analyzing it, talking about it, the ship has sailed, and we've got too much invested in this site, a great synergy with the event center, and a great facility here that can be expanded, and I think that this is the site for that expansion. And I think there still are opportunities to improve connectivity and improve some of the other development. It just has to be, the ship is out to sea, and let's do a great job of it.
I think about the testimony we received from the Sports Authority as well, how they needed more meeting rooms if they were going to attract some of those regional bigger tournaments, along with hotel rooms.
And I think the public survey backs up your recommendations in terms of the public sees the need for additional convention center space. They're mixed on how that happens, but I think to your point, definitely doubling at least in convention center space.
Yeah, we say that at a minimum, and granted, there's a process, and we want to look at what's plausible in the near term, and that's where we landed on our recommendation, with the ability to potentially grow over time as the campus evolves.
Is there discussion on average square footage of cost for new convention space?
We can share that now. The range, depending on your finishings, $350 to $450 per square foot.
Project cost, so that would be everything included, not just construction. And just to get everybody on the same page in the room and online when they watch it, the way that works is with a team approach. When you have a construction manager and a design, they work in a very collaborative manner in order to deliver to a price point. And so we'll make smart decisions based on what architectural level you want to go to. If it's all glass, if it's made out of precast, if all of those decisions go into defining if it's closer to $350 or closer to $450 per square foot. So that's what we mean, that those decisions haven't been made. That won't be part of our recommendations, but we believe that you can get a usable square footages for that amount.
In today's dollars.
In today's dollars, thank you for that, yeah.
Was there any talk on like square footage of green space to be added or where that might be added?
I don't know that we've overly defined what that looks like yet, other than the concept of at least some green space focal entry point to the facility. How that happens, I think, is later in a design process to determining exactly where would the square extra 5-floor space go, on which part of the building, or designed into the overall campus.
Terry and I were just talking, would you design a restaurant into something like this? Because that is a need on the campus. Working with, obviously, something local potentially.
We move on to the next part of the recommendation.
Yeah, I can move forward to the next part of, good question. We talked about hotel rooms. Currently we have 243 that are connected to the campus, directly connected, and we talked about the importance of that.
we intend, as part of our recommendation, to encourage the city of Sioux Falls to pursue a partnership with a full-service, adjacent, connected hotel, including a restaurant, with a minimum additional 300 rooms. And that's the near term. You get out beyond that, looking 2040, that number increases.
Questions about that? I think the components of the hotel that we've heard through testimony that are important is one, it needs to be connected to the facility. It needs to be indoor access to the flat floor space and the rest of the building. The other thing we heard over and over again is that it needed to be a full-service hotel. It had to have a restaurant. The amenities will come with the full-service hotel.
Thomas, was there a certain number of rooms NCAA looks at for a second attached?
Not so much sleeping rooms. 75 would be a minimum. That would be plenty. The meeting spaces, more so their catch. And again, if I just use the example to host a D1 men's first, second round, they expect 3 meeting rooms in each of the team hotels, each of those meeting rooms being 1,200 square feet.
Anything else for us?
No, that's arena, convention center, and hotels.
Real quick here, Dan, if I can, I'll say, I think if the recommendation from the subcommittee is to double the size of the convention center out here, I'd just like to say that even though that is what we're looking to do, I don't think that we're necessarily ignoring the fact that perhaps the city should look at convention space elsewhere. I think from the very beginning, I think the scope of this group has been this campus, and I think it's outside of our purview to really say, hey, the city should look at building a 50,000 square foot convention center downtown. I'll say, for the record, don't care, that's exactly what I think should happen, but whether that ends up in the committee report, I don't know, but I think it's important to acknowledge that convention centers do well downtown. It creates an entirely different feel and atmosphere, and visitors look for that, so I think that's something that the city should pursue, but I don't know if that necessarily makes it more fun for reporting.
It's a fair comment, thanks.
Something we did spend time discussing, realizing the scope of our work was really focused on that, on the campus.
When we look at larger convention center space and gaining larger conventions, what is the need for airport travel for these largers? I mean, we have to talk about Omaha and Kansas City and some of these competing cities with larger space, but they also have a lot larger airports. Where does that come into this scope? When we talk about advertising larger conventions, will we be able to attract them with our current airport?
And before we get into answering that, would you mind introducing yourself so we can understand your perspective a little bit?
My name is Sarah Meyer. I actually work for Buffalo Outings across the street, but I am newer to this town, and that's why I've had so many questions about how this has all come about.
Thank you.
Jared probably goes to the airport meetings more than I do, but Sioux Falls is always adding, we have a pretty healthy airport travel schedule, and with our population growth trends, that's just going to keep growing and growing. I mean, we're probably a year or two away from a direct connection to Seattle or San Francisco, so the travel into Sioux Falls just keeps growing. Terry has a good pulse on that too for conventions. You know, we're a little bit higher than flying into Omaha or Minneapolis, for example, but we're competitive with other cities our size like Fargo and Des Moines for flights and price point.
We just, some of the staff just came back from our international convention, And one of the discussions in one of the sessions was airline travel for convention cities. And interestingly, the rates still continue to be the thing. We're setting pretty well. We're not as competitive as Omaha, but it still seems to be the okay thing. We were more worried about needing more direct flights because sometimes it takes 2 stops to get into Sioux Falls, but planners aren't so worried about that anymore, is what we learned. So I think we're doing okay.
One thing, Omaha has a bigger population, of course, and they also have Lincoln, Nebraska, which is nearby, which doesn't have an airport. But a game changer for them is having Southwest. Because Southwest helps drive down the prices of the major airlines there. If we were to get Southwest into Sioux Falls, it would change the game, and we're probably 5-10 years away from them coming there.
Good question, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else? If not, Tom, do you want to talk to us about baseball some more?
Sure. Our subcommittee talked a little bit about a few questions or draft recommendations here, so I will mention those for discussion here. Again, I think it's really important to understand that this has the caveat that this works within the dominoes falling of potentially doubling major expansion to the convention center and what that does to the campus, the amount of space on campus, and potential hotel expansion, what that does to the amount of space just on campus, and then the parking doubling potentially with those as well. A question that we raised as part of this draft recommendation, is the ballpark the best use of land for the event center, convention center campus with regards to economic impact, including the economic impact of what the Sioux Falls Stadium brings at its current location and what the convention center and event center campus does at this location? Where's the return on investment? So that was a question that we proposed. And we can come back to some of these. I will list these, but these are part of our draft comments here that we want to put together in our final recommendation. Sioux Falls Stadium, as we know, 1964. It's been you can play baseball there, and you will be able to play baseball there till the end of time if you have a baseball field. The question has to do with, is it the best place? This question revolves around, is this the best location for the stadium to support professional baseball in Sioux Falls? The first one was about the campus. This one is there a better opportunity for the taxpayer of Sioux Falls? And that includes those questions like walkability, like connectivity, like development of public-private partnerships. Are there ways to make this an opportunity for us? So that was another question as part of our recommendation that we want to answer. We universally, again, came back and want to make sure it's clear that professional baseball, and this will be a part of our draft recommendation, is and should be supported by Sioux Falls. We think so. We did recommend, or we would like to draft recommend that the city create a task force, knowing that we have some time to make this decision. This is not happening tomorrow. This depends on some other dominoes, and there are other things that would need to be worked out, but the city should create a task force to study market demand, best location, ideal size, ideal amenities, viability of potentially someday with Major League Baseball affiliation, additional revenue opportunities, and economic impact opportunities for the taxpayer, and then also reviewing the economic and legal structure with the ownership as well as feasibility of a future ballpark team. There's a lot into feasibility as well. So that would be a part of that draft recommendation. And then finally, we think that there was value in the CSNL 2018 report, and we would like to incorporate that into the recommendation as well. I'd open all of them up for discussion there. And if there's additional things we need to consider as a part of this recommendation.
I think we should look at some of the economics with the facility. Can we, like we did with the arena, EJ or Scott, can you help us with, Tom talked earlier about what we've already put into the facility. What else are we going to need to do with that facility to keep it up and running?
Right. Again, most of the stuff we're talking about here is life safety and just really just taking care of the facility. Like Dual, the facility leaks all over the place, and we're taking care of a lot of that. Pour concrete, sealants, and all those sort of things that just really kind of make for a bad experience for the team. And so we're getting those things taken care of, getting the ADA issues taken care of, the fan safety issues taken care of, but yet we're not pumping any money into fan experience. It's really just taking care of a delayed RM out of the facility right now. Yeah, the locker rooms need to be renovated. That's a ways out yet. Again, the scoreboard is the team's responsibility, but that's again, that's a huge expense. Sound system, another one that could probably use an upgrade. Renovations of, the suites is probably in the near future also. So there's a lot of things that really just need to be done out there in order for it to be where other ballparks are at today, to gain that fan experience. Concession stands need to be upgraded. The list goes on and on and on. But in that $3 million that was identified early on, it was just mainly just, hey, let's just take care of what we have right now before we pump any money into fan experience and team experience and so forth. So
one of the luxuries of the Premier Center compared to that is a lot of our big investments are in fan experience, customer experience, like the boards, the amenities. Because we have the luxury of being enclosed, the ball field's exposed to all the elements, so we have to spend a lot more. The tuck pointing, the maintenance of the snow and the hail and the rain and wind and everything else. So it adds up for an outdoor facility where we have to really focus on the life safety issues and the structural stuff.
I think one of the things that's a little hard to define at this point, because we don't have a scope defined, but, parking, if all of these things are here, are we talking about parking ramps at that point? And I don't know the answer to that, and it might not be. But if we're increasing a lot of the use out here on campus, as a rule of thumb, service parking is about 10% the cost of ramp parking. So if you're going to spend $30 million on a ramp for 1,000 spaces, you might be spending, $3 million. So there's a delta of $27 million. So depending on how you want to spend that, what you want to do, and again, that's not, parking is an issue. How we handle it has not been figured out or resolved without the scope of this. So I think that costs, big projection, master planning, on our table here.
If the baseball stadium wasn't here, do you have a sense, or did you talk about how that would correlate to parking and what that would do to the parking situation on this campus?
Yeah. Yes. That space would hold between 600 and 750 parking spaces if it wasn't there. That depends a little bit on storm retention, on landscape requirements, just the design and drive aisle, but between 600 and 750.
What do we have on campus now?
Gosh, I can look it up quick.
3,000 spaces worth. I bet it's close to that, 27. I just look at parking lots right in contract. I want to say it was close to almost 3,200 with the shared. Oh, it was shared. Everything in the entire space.
I think it's like 2,700 for just
this. Right.
Yeah, it's in the map section. We've got 3,323 available spaces, and that's also including the parking lots across the street on Western, where we're allowed to park kind of on the central services and the parking lot. That accounts for about 150 or so. But 3,323 surrounding. And then there's a couple hundred down in McCart Fields that people typically park at and walk up to campus when we're overflow.
Just out of curiosity, I remember in the beginning, when they were talking about the football field and all that, their requirement is 1,100 parking spots, whatever that's in their contract. So if you were to tear that down, that doesn't get us to that point. Was there a big discussion on how much, if you were to leave it there, in the connectivity, the rapid, the rail and all that, would that could that possibly be a bigger, a better, cheaper maybe solution, or is there anything?
Rapid transit is far cheaper. So I mean, we've got thousands of parking spots downtown. We've got several parking ramps. They're all very close to each other and close to the bus depot. And bus rapid transit's about $6 million a mile. We're about 1.5 miles from downtown right here. That same cost would probably be 200 to 250 parking spots in a ramp. So if we can move people from other places in town when that's a destination before and after shows, it's a cheaper option than a parking ramp, which is $20,000 a spot minimum.
And parking ramps just don't empty easy.
Right. They don't.
They're very slow to empty, and I think our parking scores would actually probably go down because of a parking ramp, because they are so slow to empty out after an event. Go to Target Field after a baseball game there, and you'll see how slow the ramps empty out downtown Minneapolis.
Wasn't the public input there for the public input?
About 70% favor some sort of rapid transit option that was going downtown.
And parking, I mean, parking was far more favorable for the baseball games than for the concerts, because you can park right outside the gate. There's not much farther to walk. A lot of concert goers are parking way down the street and having to walk up if they're not.
And I think back to Dan's comment earlier, I think the connectivity piece of it with the Lyft and the Ubers and additional rapid transit, I think you're going to see the need for parking continue to decrease over the years. We're talking 20, 30 years down the road.
Especially with autonomous vehicles.
Right.
Those aren't far away. Ubers and Lyfts are going to be autonomous and a lot cheaper.
5, 10 years.
Why don't you go back through real quick and just summarize your recommendations, just so we're all on the same page.
I suppose this is a rhetorical, but it came in a question. Is the ballpark the best use of land for the event center, convention center campus with regards to economic impact? We would vote, no. Is this the best location for the stadium to support professional baseball in Sioux Falls? We would propose no. Again, we talked about asking the city to create an additional task force to take a deeper dive into all the caveats surrounding what that means and what the opportunities might be. And then lastly, recommending supporting the findings of the CSNL 2018 strategic planning document regarding baseball in the stadium.
Is that clear to everybody? Any more questions?
What about timing for the task force?
We proposed probably as soon as possible. I don't know that we know exactly how we need the city's input on how to do that. What maybe you can help us recommend how to do that. But from our vantage point, depending on the potential costs that we see coming and the potential just ongoing maintenance repair, that the sooner we have at least an answer to these questions, the better it'll be for the taxpayer to know, develop a strategy and know what the future might be. So we talked about doing it, this year, work as soon as possible, starting to develop a task force to really understand all of the ins and outs of that decision. Understanding that the city would be on board with these other, or I guess weigh in on these other decisions as well.
I think it's really important to highlight that the subcommittee really understands that baseball is very important to this community as a whole, and that there needs to be some more input from the experts that have stake in the future of baseball in the community. And so that really what that next task force needs to answer. Because we see as a subcommittee, this should be a major league city over time. And our players should be wanting to play in that facility. And right now in the current location and the state that the facility is in, it doesn't spark that esprit de corps or motivate young players to be major league ball players.
I think the subcommittee really hit on that midterm goal and long-term goal ultimately with, what the vision is of that stadium, whether it's here or elsewhere. But I think it's important to also focus on the challenges that are over there in the short term. And I think, I think that the progression that the city's on right now probably needs to continue with basic concrete concerns, tuck pointing, ADA type issues, and get into larger things like some of the amenities, suites, et cetera, might not be a good idea for the city to pursue some of those things, knowing that there could likely be a change out there. But any change that does occur isn't going to happen overnight, and there's some concerns out there as far as structural things that should be maintained as we get into budget season.
Any other questions or comments on baseball? So thus far, the direction we're giving towards that draft report, just to summarize so that we're all on the same page, is the arena has probably lived its useful life. It's time to take it down. We need to add at least double the amount of flat floor space to the convention center. We need to pursue opportunities to add another full-service hotel with at least 300 rooms that's connected to the facility. That this is probably not the best long-term location for a baseball stadium. The city needs to explore it further about when, where, and how it should develop. And then that kind of circles us back to some of those other miscellaneous topics. Everybody see it the same way? I think if the baseball stadium's here, I think we should start with parking, and that adds us at least 600 spots of parking. There's going to need to be a little bit further study on the parking needs of doubling the space and the parking of our hotel. What's that going to need? We may or may not need more. I think the rapid transit, I agree, is going to help alleviate stress on the existing parking, and when available, we should look at surface parking versus ramp parking just because of the expense of ramps. We don't have the density on this campus and surrounding area that downtown does with property values to help support the parking ramp. In a downtown environment, to me, parking ramps are infrastructure need. It's a needed infrastructure.
I think you summed it up well. I mean, I think we can all agree that through this process, we've really done a good job of looking at the facts, looking at all the information to get us to where we're at. And I do think one of the challenges with all the different moving parts is there are some elements that are really critical to the future success of this campus that are outside the scope. And one of those in particular is how do we, if we make a recommendation to knock the facility down, expand the convention center space, add hotel stuff, how as a city, do we help facilitate and promote some additional economic development that could help with some of the walkability things, some of the economic impact things. And so I think as part of our recommendation, we need to encourage that that's a topic that's investigated further so that, as we're looking at the whole picture here, we can maximize the opportunity. And I think that goes along with part of what Tony said on evaluating some of the adjacent properties and seeing if there's some additional opportunity that we can include along with this. But summarize it well. So.
And we really haven't talked about it yet, but I feel like if the community can agree with us on these variables, right, these are the dominoes that need to get knocked down, there's still a lot of open-ended questions that need to be asked. We don't know exactly what that convention center space looks like. There's a lot of variables. It might be wise for the city to do some campus master planning then on what do the entrance and exit points look like, what is there green space, what is it, what's the primary entrance, where does the convention center space go on the campus, where does the new hotel go on the campus. But it's difficult to even get to that point in the conversation until you've knocked down some of these dominoes to give that group an opportunity. Maybe we ought to consider that as one of our recommendations as well. Comments, questions? Our friends from LNS, do you have enough input to help us write a draft report?
TJ promised the video from today, and then we'll be reaching out to the individual subcommittees to get kind of any information. I know there was some information that was shared with the group throughout this process that we might be reaching out to try to get some of the studies and some of that information as we move forward. But no, I think that we are in a good spot to get started.
So again, we hope to have a draft of the draft report in about 2 weeks that we can start taking a look at. We will reconvene on August 21st to look at that draft report and consider how to move it forward. Last chance before we're done. Anything anybody wants to get on record? If not, thank you again for your time. Great rest of the week. If not before, we'll see you on the 21st.